Government open to discussing amendments to anti-party hopping law. Budget 2025 tabling set for 18th October. Good evening and Salam Malaysia Madani. You're watching Malaysia Tonight. I'm Otto Othman. Now, the government is open to discussing amendments to the Anti-Party Hopping Act to address gaps in the legislation. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim said that Pakatan Harapan had proposed amendments to the act in 2022, but the government at the time rejected them.
Kita dalam PH usul supaya dijelaskan siapa sahaja yang ditolak oleh parti secara automatik gugur. Jadi kalau dia nak pindah, kita bincang dialog, boleh pindah, saya tidak ada masalah.
He said this to reporters after attending Friday prayers at Surah An-Najah in Putrajaya today. Calls for amending the anti-party hopping law reignited after the Dewan Rakyat Speaker Tan Sri Johari Abdul declared no vacancy in 6 parliamentary seats held by 6 members of parliament who were expelled from Bersatu for supporting Datuk Seri Anwar. Budget 2025, the third under the Unity Government, will be tabled in Parliament on October 18th. Communications Minister Fahmi Fadil, who is also the spokesperson for the Unity Government, said the Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, has instructed all ministers to conduct Budget Madani 2025 dialogue sessions with their respective stakeholders in the relevant sectors.
Hasrat yang amat berhormat Perdana Menteri adalah untuk mendapatkan maklum balas daripada industri, daripada pemegang-pemegang taruh mengenai sama ada dasar, insentif, program, pelaksanaan, kekangan, cabaran, dan ini akan dibawa semula untuk penelitian di peringkat Kementerian Keuangan agar dapat disesuaikan dengan dokumen ataupun belanjawan 2025 nanti.
On Tuesday, at the Budget 2025 engagement session, Datuk Seri Anwar said Budget Madani 2025 will continue to focus on the benchmarks set within the Madani economy framework, including enabling Malaysia to become a leading economy in Southeast Asia. The Premier emphasised the urgent need for the government to explore methods to further boost efforts to raise the economic ceiling, such as restructuring the economy to achieve greater national wealth. On another note, Fahmi said the Prime Minister has expressed concern over cyberbullying on social media platforms. He said Datuk Seri Anwar has instructed the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission and the police to take stern action to curb cyberbullying. The issue of cyberbullying surfaced after the alleged suicide of a social media influencer in Govak, Setia, Selangor recently due to the pressure and depression following her recent experience as a victim of cyberbullying.
Yang amat berhormat Perdana Menteri juga telah menyatakan rasa cukup tidak puas hati beliau terhadap kejadian-kejadian bully cyber, dan beliau telah meminta supaya pihak MCMC, PDRM mengambil tindakan yang sangat tegas dan kita perlu berusaha untuk menghentikan bully cyber daripada berterusan. Jadi saya juga sebelum sidang media ini telah berhubung dengan pihak TikTok memaklumkan kepada mereka bahawa mereka perlu bertanggungjawab dan mereka bersedia untuk memberikan kerjasama yang erat yang baik kepada pihak kementerian untuk mengatasi masalah ini.
Banking and financial institutions in the country are reminded to always follow the list of standard operating procedures (SOP) set in recognizing complaints of customers' money being withdrawn illegally. Deputy Finance Minister Lim Hui Ying said the ministry had received several complaints about bank officials who did not take appropriate action on complaints or investigate money withdrawn without acknowledgement by bank account holders. Lim said that at the same time, the implementation of the SOPs will also be tightened since all the steps are already in place and listed, but there are still banks that refuse to follow them.
Kalau pelanggan pergi komplain kepada bank kata wangnya telah dikeluarkan secara bukan authorized ya, tetapi selagi bank kena buktikan yang adalah kecuaian pelanggan itu. Kalau bank tidak dapat buktikan itu adalah kecuaian, dia semua telah ikut tetapi masih wangnya telah di unauthorized telah dikeluarkan, bank akan bertanggungjawab.
Bank account holders are advised to make it a habit to check their bank accounts, and if they are not satisfied with the results of the bank's investigation, the customer can complain to the Ombudsman for Financial Services or directly to Bank Negara Malaysia. Meanwhile, police are tracking down several individuals to assist in the investigation after over 2 million ringgit went missing from 2 fixed deposit accounts of a local bank in Kuala Kangsar, Perak. Bukit Aman Commercial Crime in Department Director Datuk Sri Ramli Muhammad Yusof said police would continue the probe, although the prime suspect, believed to be the bank staff, was found dead on 5th July. He said the bank lodged a police report on 9th July after the account holders complained that some of their money had been withdrawn and the accounts had been closed.
Kegiatan kekitangan ini hanya terbongkar apabila pada 27 Jun 2024, 2 orang pemilik akaun simpanan tetap terbabit hadir ke bank untuk membuat pengeluaran wang dari akaun simpanan tetap mereka. Setelah semakan dibuat, didapati sebahagian daripada sijil akaun simpanan tetap mereka telah ditutup. Pelanggan-pelanggan tersebut menafikan pernah membuat penutupan atau mengeluarkan wang dari akaun simpanan tetap milik mereka.
He said the money were withdrawn and deposited into several savings accounts, adding that the case is being investigated under Section 408 of the Penal Code. Datuk Sri Ramli said financial institutions must conduct thorough investigations on any unauthorized transaction, quoting Deputy Finance Minister Lim Hui Ying. The General Operations Force PGA arrested a local man and a Thai national who were filling diesel into a foreign registered trailer at the Bukit Kayu Hitam Industrial Zone yesterday. The Domestic Trade and Cost of Living Ministry Kedah Office Director Muhammad Nizam Jamaluddin said the PGA team carried out the raid at about 6 a.m. He said upon inspecting the premises of the controlled items wholesaler, the raiding team found a Thai registered trailer was filling diesel. Further checks revealed that the premises owner was suspected of selling a controlled item or diesel to an unauthorized buyer. They also found a modified additional tank to store diesel in the trailer's prime mover. Muhammad Nizam added that the PGA team then seized 1,688 litres of diesel with an estimated value of 5,654 ringgit. The Jitra Magistrates Court granted a 4-day remand order against the 2 suspects beginning yesterday for further investigation. Still ahead in our business segment, MyCC study on paddy and rice industry still ongoing. The Competition Commission MyCC is still conducting a study on the country's paddy and rice industry, including allegations of the existence of a cartel within it. The Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security stressed that it will not interfere with any study conducted by MyCC and has given full cooperation by providing all information and feedback from the time to the Commission. The ministry reiterates that it will not protect any party found to be involved in the rice and paddy cartel. It said if it is found that any party has committed an offence under the Competition Act 2010, Act 712, the ministry will not hesitate to take stern action against the Control of Paddy and Rice Act 1994, Act 522. The ministry added it is still waiting for the findings from MyCC's study and calls on all parties to refrain from making any speculation and leave the matter to MyCC for further action. Malaysia's Industrial Production Index IPI rose by 2.4% year-on-year in May, driven by steady output growth in the manufacturing sector. Chief Statistician Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad Uzair Mahidin said the IPI remained positive in May, with the manufacturing sector growing by 4.6% and a 4.2% expansion in electricity output. Compared to the previous month, the IPI rebounded to 3.5% from negative 7.6%. He said the steady output growth in the manufacturing sector was bolstered by the acceleration in export-oriented industries, which grew by 3.7% against 2.6% recorded in April. This marked the highest growth registered since November 2022, amid a strong rebound in manufacture of computer, electronics and optical products to 8.4%, and a 4.8% increase in the manufacture of vegetable and animal oils and fats. Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad Uzair noted that the growth momentum was also reflected in the country's manufactured goods export performance, which expanded by 13.5% in the month under review. On a month-on-month basis, he said export-oriented industries bounced back by 9% from negative 11.6% in April, while the growth of domestic-oriented industries output remained sound at 6.4%. In another development, Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad Uzair said Malaysia's natural rubber production rose 20.1% month-on-month to 25,608 tonnes in May from 21,325 tonnes in April. Now, year-on-year, natural rubber production increased by 6.1% from 24,126 tonnes in May last year. Natural rubber production in May for Malaysia was mainly contributed by the smallholders sector as compared to the estates sector. Citing the Malaysia Rubber Board Digest published in May, the department said the Kuala Lumpur rubber market started with a bullish tone, with standard Malaysian rubber 20 surging to a new high at 840 sen per kilogram, the highest since April 2017, before fluctuating towards month-end. Generally, the market sentiment was boosted by firmer advice in regional rubber futures markets amid concerns over tight global raw materials supply in major producing countries due to heavy rains. It said the market sentiment was also supported by China's strong car sales and the latest stimulus measures announced to shore up the economy. China remained as the main destination for natural rubber exports, which accounted for 39.2% of total exports in May. Public Investment Bank Berhad has maintained the headline inflation projection at 3% year-on-year, with risks skewed towards the lower end of the official 2% to 3.5% range, contingent on the timing of the RON 95 subsidy rationalization. The bank said in light of renewed fiscal discipline, the potential introduction of targeted subsidies for RON 95 in the second half of this year remains under review and is still uncertain. It said the fuel price for diesel has remained at 3 ringgit 35 sen per litre since the diesel subsidy rationalization program commenced on June 10th. Given diesel's weight of just 0.2% in the overall headline consumer price index, Public Investment Bank assesses that the potential for significant inflationary effects is minimal. It noted that a straightforward calculation indicates that a 1% increase in diesel prices would result in a mere 0.002% rise in the overall inflation rate. It also said a gradual approach to subsidy reform is crucial to prevent abrupt inflationary shocks. Meanwhile, MIDF Amanah Investment Bank Berhad believes the stabilization of core inflation and the challenging external environment may influence Bank Negara Malaysia BNM to keep the overnight policy rate OPR at the current rate of 3% throughout this year. However, it said the decision would be subject to the stability of economic growth, the pace of price increases, and further improvement in macroeconomic conditions, particularly a continued recovery in the labour market and growing domestic demand. From a medium-term perspective, it said the post-pandemic policy rate normalization provides room for BNM to better manage risks That could destabilize the future economic outlook, such as persistently high inflation and a further rise in household indebtedness. On the ringgit, due to persistent inflation environment in the United States, MIDF Amanah Investment foresees elevated demand for the US dollar at least until there is a clearer outlook on its interest rate direction. It remains cautious of downside risks that might hinder the ringgit's rally this year, such as delays in the US Federal Reserve's interest rate easing and further geopolitical tensions between China and the US, as well as in the West Asia. And now we move on to our next segment, On the Table, and we move on to Mohana, who's currently with our special guest. Take it away.
Thank you, Otto. Good evening and welcome back to the program. The Dewan Rakyat was recently told that 7.81 billion ringgit in cash withdrawals were made by EPF members from their account 3, which is the flexible account, as of 24th of June. Now, this was following a total transfer of 11.52 billion ringgit from account 2, which is the Sejahtera account, made by 27.8% of members under the age of 55 who had decided to make that initial transfer permitted by EPF since the account restructuring on the 11th of May. Now, with us to discuss this further, we have distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasea of the Asia-Europe Institute at University Malaya. Prof, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Prof, my first question today has to do with this transfer. Now, EPF members have till 31st of August to make a one-time transfer of 1/3 of their savings from account 2 to 3. And now in just slightly over a month, we are already seeing withdrawals of over 7 billion ringgit. I presume that this figure will get bigger as we get closer to the deadline. Should we be alarmed?
It's a good question, but let's not forget that the attempt to restructure the EPF funds to increase from the earlier program of having 70%. Upon retirement, you are able to withdraw the money, and 30% was devoted to funds that to do with those seeking to buy a house, a car, and so on. Now, the idea of bringing on the flexible account, and now we are only restructuring the second account rather than the first one. In fact, we are actually passing on 5% from that second account.
That's right.
And then creating this flexible account 15%.
Yeah.
Now, what actually that means is that principally, me looking at the data set, the person retiring still has got 75% for post-retirement use of the money, which we think because we no longer expect the person, although many go to work still, to have an income stream. Now, I think the concern that we have over the last month that they have withdrawn 7.81 billion, unless we have really an assessment of those who are withdrawing it, whether they are from the B40, it's still difficult to expect them because you have a deadline of August 31st to make that sort of withdrawal. My own impressions are that because the intention of providing that followed from government's own interviews with people. And they were actually, in fact, the first attempt to do that was during COVID. The previous government was doing it then. And what looked like a bad, an example for the people, seemingly was what was chosen by the people. Instead of, say, a poor person going to an alung or without a collateral seeking a much higher payment, you're just seeking your own fund. This is a decision made by the contributor.
Correct.
And it's only the 15% we are dealing with, not now an increased 75%.
Yeah.
We have to ask this question. Should we leave an individual who's no longer, you cannot call as a baby who can't think, making the decision? Unless you have much more profound information to say that they are misusing that fund or abusing it in some way.
Yeah.
I think it's too early, even though it's 7.181 billion. And how many households does it involve? So I, as an academic, I'm making that point from that perspective, trying to be neutral in relation to the respondent, to the employee who's withdrawing that money. And this is money that is actually from an account meant for borrowing to buy houses, to buy cars, and rather than at retirement age.
Right.
So I wouldn't be terribly concerned. I must say that I wouldn't be unless you have that sort of data to make sure that these people are abusing it because they're just simply being really not careful at all in the way they spend the money.
Yeah.
And yet you are still seeing the 75%
still there,
kept there,
safe
for them at retirement.
That's right.
So even though the whole logic of savings from the Modigliani-Miller theory, the origin of it, is that for a common man rather than the poorest or the richest, because it doesn't apply to them, that saving is there really because when you start, you haven't got the money, you will be studying with loans, you will have a house to pay and so on. You start that way. And then you contribute towards this fund, which not only pays for all that in some ways, but in the end provides you the savings.
Yeah.
Now, extrapolating from that, I'm not terribly concerned though. That's what I would say.
Now, Prof, speaking about that, it does seem though that working adults, especially under 55, seem to be in dire need of cash or liquidity. Is there a possibility of two things here? One is the low to medium salary, and second, the rising cost of living. What do you think about that?
These are all pertinent points to look at, but are we going to narrow it down to the EPF? The EPF withdrawal gives you an indication, a very powerful indication, presumably, rather than jumping to conclusions, that people are borrowing because of emergencies.
Right.
Either kecemasan or darurat. They are looking at that as a point. Instead of accessing much higher rates of interest in the black market, and of course without the collateral, they are unlikely, even though the OPR is still 3%. It's still a cost to bear. Now, I am one who feels we need to really look at the statistics behind the household, whether they are really borrowing for emergencies.
Right.
If we are dealing with emergencies, then we need to have check our own system of providing allowances. The point that you're raising, 7.81 billion, is a powerful point to raise concerns that would require us to do the research. The statistics definitely, because not only that they have a system of identifying how funds are used, the PADU systems clearly will show what the Stats Department is doing through e-invoicing. That would clearly show who are those withdrawing and for what they are withdrawing, including the transactions they make.
And that is important information, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To go into the micro
and it's not
details.
that you can't get it.
Yeah, you can.
It's available.
Especially after this.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Now, Prof, will this account 3 withdrawal help boost domestic consumption?
Now, we'll have to see whether, because I remember looking at social media before coming here, it gives the impression that people are simply withdrawing, buying all these luxurious goods and so on. I think unless we have the data to prove it, it's really a harmful statement to make.
Yeah.
And our concern is really the B40, whether they are the ones largely responsible for withdrawing. We shouldn't be concerned because the rich are withdrawing it, because the EPI is meant for post-retirement. If you are a businessman invested in $1 billion business, there's no issue about their livelihood. Now, talking about this, we'll have to then just see whether that the money that's withdrawn is used to buy largely goods made in Malaysia. It's a very important thing. If they are largely going to be buying imported goods.
Or traveling.
Or even travel, of course. And again, traveling in foreign airlines and so on. It would mean a leakage in the system. And the demand that is created from that 7.81 billion is actually diffusing outside the economy. Now, that's a concern that one should have. Now, that actually requires, again, looking at the data. What does the data tell? Now, of course, such an amount can help boost the economy, provided it's confined largely to the domestic, or to boost the domestic economy.
But that data will be very difficult to get, isn't it? How people are spending that additional money that they've taken out.
Since the concern we have, I mean, if we end up feeling that out of the 7.81 billion, a whole lot of it is withdrawn not by the B40, that shouldn't be a real concern for us.
Right.
Except that the other measures of what the Bank Negara or the government does to discourage, for example, the withdrawals from being directed at the external economy. Now, what that actually means is that this group of B40 we're more concerned about. If they are withdrawing because of emergencies, we'll have to see why these emergencies are taking place. It also requires revamping, restructuring, a whole range of things so that we are sterilizing the system in such a way that the poor will not be so vulnerable to all these emergencies. But otherwise, we now are looking at whether they are actually spending the money using Malaysian firms. Even if the firm is a foreign firm, it's still better than buying an imported good. But still, the remittances that would come from profits appropriated from those transactions. So if you're looking at boosting the economy, 7.81 billion, now, this is the problem I have had because I remember in a way where we had this knee-jerk reaction when we had the global financial crisis. All of a sudden, there's a huge collapse in exports. The central bank promoted aggressively by lowering interest rates, borrowings. What that has done is really to exacerbate household debt. I'm not sure. It is still a problem we're grappling with, something that started in 2008, 2009. So we have to be really careful to see the macroeconomy as a whole. What is happening? Picture it, get all the data correctly, and then see whether this 7.81 billion is indeed going to boost the economy. Remember, we've been talking about, at least our main reader was talking about slow growth in wages. Whether, and we are concerned about, and I'm not sure whether this can be achieved, the median income that Malaysians have had, 2.6 thousand, which is 2,600 a month, median household income, 2023. Government is keen, introducing the NIMP4, to raise it to 4.51 thousand, which is 4,510 ringgit by 2030. Is this realizable is a question that you need to pose to.
And one final question, Prof, just before I let you go. Will this then affect annual dividends which go out to members every year?
Again, the determination of dividends is done by the EPF board. And now, will that affect? You see, the thing is, if more of the money is withdrawn, it means having to pay less dividend. People have basically detached themselves from having to access the dividend we are speaking about. Now, again, it depends on returns. Remember that EPF, like many other bodies that we have, it's got huge funds, and where they put the money will attract more returns than you and me putting the funds. We'll probably get the most, and with the OPR at 3%, we'll get less than that in the savings market, or even in fixed deposits. So the question of whether it will affect the dividends, it again depends on the returns they are getting from their own investments. So whether it will go up or not will depend on that. Now, because the 7.81 billion is being withdrawn, it only means that there are less obligations to pay a relatively higher rate because much of it is no longer there.
Prof, thank you so much for your wonderful insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. We've been speaking to Professor Dr. Raja Rasya of the Asia-Europe Institute at University of Malaya. Together with Otto, I'm Mohana Priya. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Good night.